Hello, everyone. I'm Alana, Wilderness Tourist Community Programs Manager, and want to introduce myself and welcome you all to the virtual village. In response to these uncertain times, we decided to use all of our energy to create the virtual village and are looking towards the natural world and asking, what can this time teach us? As a part of awakening the earth-based traditions of Judaism, Wilderness Torah creates village life during our immersive land-based festivals by uplifting and encouraging the individual gifts of the collective community. 4 times a week in this virtual village space, you will learn with Wilderness Torah community members who will be sharing their gifts, as well as longtime stakeholders in the earth-based Jewish movement, such as Natan. Thank you for being here with us, and we're excited to have you part of our village and would love to see a raise of hands for those of you that this is your first Wilderness Torah program. Cool. And also those of you who this is your first virtual village program. Great, we're all here. Awesome. We are committed to keeping the virtual village accessible and free. If you would like to support Wilderness Torah in this effort, we welcome any and all donations, large and small, as we endeavor to provide Jewish wisdom and community building during this hard time. If you're new to Wilderness Torah and want to learn more about what we do, my peer Malka will share our link to our webpage and donation in the chat. This session is being recorded and live streamed to Facebook, and we will be uploading this recorded session to our webpage, and you should check out all of our other sessions that are up there. And without further ado, super excited to welcome in and invite Rabbi Natan, who is currently a member of the VAD of the Aleph Ordination Program and serves as chair of the Rabbinic Text Department. He is also the director of the Aleph Ordination Program's New Earth-Based Judaism track. Natan is the founder of Organic Torah, a nonprofit which fosters holistic thinking about Judaism, environment, and society. Natan is also the director of Open Circle Jewish Learning Program at Hebrew College, and we're very excited to learn with you today.
Thank you, Ilana. It's great to be here. It's great to see you all and see your faces, even if I can't see you in person. And I wanted to talk today just some of the basics about what I've been working on for a while, which I've been calling Organic Torah, and I also call it Torah of Nature, Nature of Torah. Because the idea really is that the nature of Torah, that is to say, all Jewish wisdom, is really not, it's not arranged, it's not in the same form as we often think of knowledge in the West. And it really is much more closely aligned with nature. So we can look, when we look at the Torah of nature, as I say, when we look at how the natural world works, we're also looking at how Torah works. So I've got some, feel free to ask questions, and just jump in. There's not too many of us, so it's not going to be a problem if you just feel like you want to ask. But I wanted to just jump in now, and I've got some slides, PowerPoints, and we'll take some time to think about this. So I'm going to share screen with you. Hold on a second. So. There you are, you can see that. So let me just go down. They say the nature of Torah, the Torah of nature. And, well, hold on a second. When I'm sharing screen, oh, there we are. So this image is a really central image, and I don't know if anybody recognizes this image. I mean, there are many images now like it, but the image of the Earth, which became really kind of iconic and famous back in the original Earth Day and the original Whole Earth catalog. If people probably not alive back then, but I was alive, although I was young, in like 1970s. And this also for many of our teachers, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, was for him a image which was a real paradigm shift. Why is this a paradigm shift? Just this image, on some level, the image is the first time that we're actually able to see ourselves as one, as all parts of this one planet, whereas so often we think of ourselves so much in our own little groups, in our nation, in our religion, in whatever it is that divides us. And this beautiful planet, which is a living planet, is also where we are part, and we are all one within that. So that's a big shift, and that's one of the big shifts that I want to talk about, just to connect you all, because the big shift that really I'm talking about is how do we move from seeing just the parts to seeing the whole? And to me, that's a big part. That's everything. That's the shift that we need to make. And so let's go into that. And again, feel free to jump in if you have any questions or thoughts. I'm going to go back and forth with sharing screen, but let's take a look at how this works, this shift from thinking only in parts, of taking things apart, versus thinking as the whole. So if you go back to where did this start from? 17th century, scientific revolution. And sometimes this, you could start in any number of places, but this is an interesting place to start. This is when we really made the shift from thinking of the world as alive, from thinking of nature as our mother, to thinking of the world as a machine. And that started when we started all of the basic, the people who started modern science made that shift to a mechanistic worldview. We think of the world as a machine, thinking like just the way machines were working in a linear kind of a way. This causes that causes that. Thinking in that linear pattern, that was a new way of thinking, an objective. That's to say, thinking of the world as an object, no longer as a subject. One of the biggest things that we have lost, which we don't barely remember now after 3-4 centuries of this, is how do we think of the world as a subject and not an object? Because we've thought of it as like, well, we're subjects, we humans are subjects, but the rest of the world? So that started, not, it wasn't forever that way. We used to think of ourselves as one subject among other subjects, as part of the world. Reductionist, what does that mean? It means that we try to understand things by reducing them to their smallest parts. And that worked out very nicely. I mean, we think about science and medicine, and let's reduce everything to what we can see under a microscope, which is really important, as we're seeing today. That's also really important, to think about things, how to find the small cause. But in fact, we also know that that's not the only way to look at it. That if you only focus on the smallest parts, you're missing the big picture. You're missing how things actually work in the world. They work in the world as networks of relationships, and networks that come to form a whole and not just a part. That's a big shift. And so that's where we've been. That's where since the 17th century, we've been in that world of mechanistic, objective, reductionist. But there's been a shift. And one of the shifts has been to think about within science. Science itself has started to shift. And that's a really exciting thing, because it's opening up a whole new vista when science itself starts to shift. And so it's not just like the soft sciences, the social sciences, but it's even the hard sciences. And so just having this quote, and one of the big things is this idea of systems. Science itself, and many sort of parts of our disciplines, whether it's hard science or social science or economics, starting to think not in terms of breaking things down, but in terms of how do we look at the system. So here's a quote: systems biology is about putting together rather than taking apart, integration rather than reduction. It requires that we develop ways of thinking about integration that are as rigorous as our reductionist procedures, but different. This is a major change. The systems level view of life can be compared to music. And so this is a biologist, this is like a hardcore scientist who's, wrote this book, The Music of Life, Biology Beyond Genes, thinking about that analogy to music. Because what is music if not relationships, if not harmonies where things come together, creating a beauty that comes through the relationships that we experience. So I want to introduce something now, which I call the 3 MEMS, because one of the things I find, and let me just stop share for a second so I can see people. One of the big things that I really got excited about a number of years ago was that when we see that shift to systems way of thinking happening in the West, happening in all these disciplines, it got really exciting for me, because I felt like, wow, that's the way Judaism has always been working. Judaism has always, I think, had that way of looking at the world as a whole and looking at relationships before we look at simply breaking things down into parts. And so what I've started to do was to say, well, where can we find some things that are a correspondence, where we can find something that's a core Jewish principle that's also a core principle in this system's way of looking at the world. Maybe we can build a bridge and a common language. Because if we have a common language between our spiritual world and our scientific world, it feels like there can be like a lot of progress. We can bring worlds together, and we can bring our hearts together and our minds together because we're speaking the same language. So that's what I'm trying to do, what I call these 3 MEMS, and I'll share I'll share screen again. So we're going to talk about each of these in their own term, but minyan, I have that connected to this principle of emergence. And we'll talk about what that means. Emergence is a whole field unto itself. And people know what minyan is the 10 that's needed to create the microcosm of community, going from the individual to the community. The second mem is mikdash, which is connected to the system's principle of nestedness, or sometimes we talk about that as fractals, because you have the small piece that's embedded or nested within a larger level, which is embedded in another level. And that's the same as if you look at mikdash, you look at the sanctuary. Mikdash means sanctuary. The way we have the Holy of Holies in the temple, and we have outside that the holy area, and outside that the priest courtyard, and outside that the other courtyard, and then the city. And then, so you have nested levels of organization. We'll talk about what that means. And then the third mem is mitzvah. Mitzvah is that small action that we say it's an action that we're commanded, or that we connect to God through that action. We find a connection through that action. And that's the principle of bifurcation events or tipping points. In systems thinking or ecological thinking, we know that a small action can have huge consequences. It's really a different way of thinking about science than the way that says like we can predict everything, because in system science, you don't know. You're not able always to predict everything. Let me stop share for a second and just see if anybody has questions or thoughts that you want to stop me before I go on. Pat, yeah.
Coming from is that I've been very dissatisfied with a Jewish practice at the services, the minyan that I go to, not connecting with the Siddur. And I've been coming from discoveries, reading Thomas Berry outside of Judaism, and he studied so many different religions and cultures, and the guy is so deep and broad. I've been looking for that, and when I discovered Wilderness Torah, and particularly what you're saying right now, it's in our Judaism, because we were originally a tribal people, so we must have connected with the earth, that way originally. So I'm so gratified it's like from Barry, I'm coming back and discovering now that it's in our Judaism. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you, Pat, because it really is, we're in this kind of place where many of us inherited a Judaism that feels very disconnected. And there's all sorts of historical reasons around that, of the different, how Jews came to America, tried to fit in, and all of those different things. But we are also in a unique place right now, and it's in many ways a difficult place, but also a really exciting place, where we're able to actually connect back to our roots, and connect back to, as you said, like our tribal earth-based origins. And part of that is what's going on in the world today, is that we need, as a Western culture, we need to start looking at that. And so we've opened our eyes. The need to start looking at ecology and the earth has actually opened our eyes to what's in our tradition. So let's go back to the screen. Let me see. Hold on. No, that's actually smaller. Whoa, sorry. All right, that's.
Hey, Natan.
Yeah.
If you do the slideshow, you can screen share the slideshow window, which will have a lot more area for the slides and not so much of the PowerPoint borders.
Okay, let me do that. Thank you. Thank you. And then okay, that's great. So let's look a little bit at emergence. This is one of my favorite ecologists, Tom Wessels. I don't know if anybody's done one of his forest walks, but Tom Wessels is a wonderful ecologist out here in the Northeast. What does emergence mean? Since the parts of a complex system can interact in numerous ways, I gotta get all these things out of my way so I can read. Researchers in the area quickly realized that it was much more productive to study the interactions between the parts as well as the pattern or system behavior that emerged from those interactions, rather than the parts alone. What was realized was that the system's behavior or pattern was far greater than the sum of the system's parts. And this is this is core to an ecological point of view. One of the stories that Tom tells, he told this story once when I was doing a walk with him, and he talked about when he was in graduate school in ecology, and his teacher told him about like what they would do at that time if they found disease in a forest. And they said that they used to find the tree, the biggest, strongest, healthiest tree, and they would cut down all the trees around it, because the theory was that the tree, that way there wouldn't be any competition. And that way this tree would get all the water and all the sun that it needed, and the forest would kind of like build from that. But they discovered that that method actually didn't really work very often. And since that time, as many of you may know, there's been a lot of work done on how a forest is actually a whole which is greater than the sum of the parts, that the trees actually need one another. They have these systems of communication through the roots and then the mycorrhizal fungi that are connecting the roots, sending information and nutrients all around. And so in fact, the health of the forest is really in the connection between the trees and in the community, that the trees actually don't benefit from getting rid of their competition. What they really need is community. And so that was really a wonderful lesson that Tom is talking about in his ecological work. And that's I think one of the really important principles, this idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. There's so much magic in that. What does it mean that it's almost like, what does it mean the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? Okay, now that I'm in slides, how do I make it go to the next slide? That's a good question.
Just space bar, just tap the space bar should work, or just click on this window.
Wait, click on which?
Or you can use the right arrow key on your keyboard.
Let's see, none of those are working.
So click on the PowerPoint window.
Yeah.
And now that it's been selected, do the right arrow.
If this doesn't work, I think you can click escape in your keyboard. Oh, there you go. You got it. Great.
Okay, let me go back. Okay, I went down. Whoa, I went way far down there. Wow, wow. No, I was good. I'm clicking on the space bar and it's going crazy. How do I go back up? Sorry.
I think if you scroll the left side toolbar to the slide
Oh,
you'd like, and
okay.
then
I,
go
I,
back
I
into
found a, I
slideshow.
found a method that works here.
Great.
Sorry, getting all these things ahead of time. All right. Okay, well, we're back to the other thing, but so let's go back. So that's emergence. And so what I want to think about is, where did this start in Judaism? Looking at one of the key verses that I find is in Deuteronomy chapter 11. The land that you're going to come into is a land of hills and valleys. It soaks up water from the rains of heaven. It's a land your Lord, your God looks after. And that's compared, if you look at that verse, it's comparing that to Egypt, where they got their water through the Nile, and they actually lived in this illusion that it was always there. But what do we see about this land? This is obviously a contemporary picture of the hills in the land of Israel, and yet these are the same terraces that have been there for thousands of years. And what is it like to farm a land, to live on a land that you need to terrace like that in order to save every drop of water? It's a lot of work to terrace like that. And it means that you've got to cooperate with your families and your neighbors in order to, and you need to know your land very well. You need to know exactly, because one side of the hill is not going to be the same as another side of the hill. The windward side is not going to get the same rain as the leeward side. All of these things, and you can see also the beauty. I don't know about you, but I find that these terracing, it's a beauty because you can see it's working with the land according to the contour. It's not just imposing some kind of like monolithic, sort of like mechanistic kind of a thing. It's working with the shape of the land, with the contours of the land. So this is really where we started. This relationship to the land, which taught us, I believe, for a long time, this idea that life comes with relationship. It comes with, the beauty comes when we can put all the elements together. When we can put all the elements together, then something emerges which is beautiful and healthy and holy. And that's what we see. It's like when we set up a society that we're working in harmony with the nature, with our families, with our communities, with God, all of those things come together, then the rain comes, we're blessed, and there's a sense of health and holiness. That's where we started for 1,000 years. But then, we were exiled from the land, and we needed to start a different kind of Judaism. And I think the miracle of what the rabbis did, the miracle of what they were able to do, was that they were able to take that same way of thinking, a relational way of thinking, a conversational way of thinking, and they said, okay, we have to put things into words and texts. But look at this page of the Talmud. I find in some ways a similar kind of beauty to those terraced hills. It's like conversation, it's relationship. It's like you have all of the inside and the outside and the up and down, and it's not a linear page. And that's the way Talmud is learned. Talmud is learned in community and conversation. And I think it's amazing how the rabbis, in some ways, bottled up that tribal way of thinking, that land-based way of thinking, relationship way of thinking, and they put it into their texts. And this is the tree of life, the Torah that we learn. So that's really what we're trying to see. How do we actually preserve, even when we're not on the land, we try to preserve a very living, vital, dynamic way of thinking, which I call organic. And so this is another thing, coming back to that quote from the biologist who talked about how we can look at science, at cells and genes, how it's like a song. It says the Torah has also been called a song. How is the whole Torah called a song? It is the nature and hidden richness of song. In a song, the idea is not fully explained the way it is in prose. One has to look at it sideways, that is to say, non-linearly. And this is not only true of the Torah, but all sacred writings. So this is, this is not a renewal contemporary rabbi. This is like a very traditional 19th century rabbi, Eastern Europe, and understanding that the beauty of the Torah is like a song. You can't understand it unless you actually see the whole, if you see at how it works together with the harmonies and the rhythms. All of those things are what makes Torah beautiful and amazing. And here's another 20th century rabbi, amazing rabbi, Rab Kalanimus Kalman Shapiro, who writes about what does it mean to learn when we think about this. He says, the mitzvot reveal only the limbs, while the Sefer, the book, reveals the essence. The whole form of which the mitzvot are only the limbs. Therefore, when one looks into a book or hears words of Torah, if one only sees or hears one or two things, only hears the limbs and misses the teacher's wholeness, doesn't encounter the prophecy within the words. That is to say, we can actually find prophecy, not prophecy in the sense of telling the future or making miracles, but prophecy in the sense of we can connect to a feeling of holiness in the world, in the words, when we put it together as a whole. That is to say, really, he's giving real practical advice. When we want to start learning something, learn from a teacher for enough time to really get the sense of what is her Torah, what are they, what's the whole, what's the gestalt, or if you're learning a book, learn the book deeply, because then something emerges. And then what he goes on to say is that then you're not just like quoting a thing here and there, then it becomes part of you, because when you connect to that wholeness, so then it connects to your wholeness. And when it connects to your wholeness, then you become a fountain of Torah. And so it's a real shift when we think about, yeah, we need to learn, we need to get to the wholeness. So let me stop for a second also and just see if there's questions or thoughts that anybody wants to say while I take a breath. Was that Elizabeth? Did you have something?
Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm a follower of Sufism, and there's a saying by Hazrat Anayat Khan that says, the only book that can truly enlighten a person is the holy book of nature. And he didn't mean to dismiss all of the sacred writings throughout the world. It's just that all of the sacred writings have gone through the human mind at one point and need to go through the human mind again in order to have some meaning for us. So we have this, there's this beautiful gift that God has given us, which is language, but it's possible for language to lead us astray. Whereas if I have a relationship directly with a flower, I can touch God in a particular way that cannot be taken astray. But so yeah, your introduction just kind of brought that to me, and what you've said here about the whole. Anyway, just thought I'd share that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. It's because that's the way nature works. Nature works. It's the beauty comes because of the relationships. We know, like if you walk into a natural environment, a forest or anything, you see there's no waste, and there's a beauty that touches us deeply because everything is connected. And we are able to tap into that, and we are able to actually even create, we are able to find languages when we tap into that same way of thinking. We can make our culture in harmony with nature, or we also have the possibility of making our nature, our culture really foreign. And that's what on some level we've been doing for a few centuries, is actually working against nature. But I don't think we don't need to do that. So let me come back to sharing my screen, and we'll go on a little. So the next mem that I talk about is mikdash, is nestedness. And if you can see here, this is, you might recognize the nautilus shell, which is beautiful. It's often a given example of the Fibonacci, or the golden proportion, where it's, you know, just this, you can see that shape in so many things in art and and architecture, and also in nature, all over the place. But it's this thing, it's a repeating pattern. And then what's this on this side? You can't see it very well. It's a little diagram of the temple as we heard, the temple in Jerusalem. If you see way up here where my pointer is, that is the Holy of Holies in there. And then just outside of that, you get the holy area. And then just inside of that, whoa, what happened? Sorry, I don't know how that happened. You get the courtyard, and then the larger courtyard. Wow, I keep on moving things. I don't know how that happens here. Anyway, so that's really the comparison I make, is that this idea of mikdash is an idea of nestedness. And how does that work? See, again, with Tom Wessel's, complex systems tend to be nested, one within the other, and they're separated by fuzzy boundaries. This is something that Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi talked about permeable membranes. That we can have boundaries, but they need to be permeable. These are boundaries that allow for the flow of energy, materials, information between larger and smaller scale systems, but maintain each system's integrity. Biology, political systems demonstrate these attributes well. So what's this? Now I have, you may recognize the Shema, but this is maybe in a little different way of thinking about the Shema, because I think the Shema is actually really it's our central saying. We say it all the time, and yet it's an example of this same kind of nestedness. What's going on? You know, if you really want these words, if you want these words to be part of your life, if you want to have those words infuse the way you are in the world, in your life, so you start in your heart. And then from that center, it goes to your soul, which you can think of your soul as infusing life energy to your whole body. And then your might, how is your might projecting even past your body? You in your home, when you think about it's on your hands, that's to say, using how you project into the world with your eyes, how you connect. You write them on the doorposts and upon your gates when you walk on the way. So you can see all of those different points of transition. And even in time, transition when you lie down at night, when you rise up in the morning, the transitions between day and night. And even to your children, the transition between one generation, next generation. So much of our Jewish life has to say, when we are making these transitions, whether it's a transition from inside my house to outside my house, or a transition from in my body to connecting to the world, those transition points are the places where I want to pay attention. Those are the places where we're nested. Beautiful song. We won't go through the whole thing, but Rav Kook wrote about the fourfold song, and this is so important. He talks about some people sing the song of their soul, then you can connect to the song of your nation. Some people sing the song of humanity. Some people sing the song and unite with all existence. So it's a nested pattern. And some people sing all of these together. One of the things that that I think is so important about this nestedness is that we have so many problems today about either or. It's like either you're a tribalist or you're a universalist. We've got wars being fought about you know, like whether you're a tribalist or a universalist. And this is saying no, in terms of what Judaism says and what nature says, is that you don't have to choose. It's nested. You can be both and. You don't have to be either or. And you can be a part of your people. You can connect to the Jewish people, and that doesn't take away from connecting to humanity, of connecting to nature. You can be an individual, and that doesn't take away from your ability to be part of community. We see that Judaism doesn't say you have to choose. Judaism says you should be a strong individual, have your boundaries, but that is really most effective when you're part of community. And if you're part of community, don't stop with just your small community. You can connect to larger. So we don't need to choose between the either or. We can have that nested sense of both and. So then the third thing that I want to look at is this idea of mitzvah, the mitzvah and the connection to that with bifurcation events, or the idea of a tipping point. You can see this picture of the straw, that's where we get the saying from, the straw that broke the camel's back. But that idea that one straw, it could be one small thing, could tip the whole system. And that's something to think about, like how do we understand this idea of something that could tip the whole system, which is a small action. We see that all the time, and we see that so much in our lives. It's like, well, should I make that phone call? Should I send that email? It doesn't make any difference. Should I vote in that election? Well, we'll make a difference. But that's how differences are made. That small action that can tip something, because that small action, the way a complex system works is that it's not linear. But the thing about a small action is you don't know. Maybe it'll do something, maybe it won't. We don't know. If it was like set in stone and deterministic, then it would all be predictable. But in fact, it's not predictable. It's actually, you do it because it's the right thing. And you do it whether it's going to work or not. And we know that that's actually an ancient spiritual principle. It goes back to Hinduism. It goes back to the Bhagavad Gita. If people have read the Bhagavad Gita, that says you have to give up on the fruit of your action. Do the action because that is your job. That is your destiny. And it's really the same thing that we say about a mitzvah. Do the mitzvah because that is the mitzvah. That is the need of the hour. That is the need of the moment. That is what the greater whole is asking of you. And that greater whole is asking you to do it. So you do it whether it's going to work or not. But the fact is that we know that, in fact, that's the way that things change. And you can change so many things just with that one action. And of course, it works that way in the world as well. We see so much with climate change. We see that small things, a small change in the climate, we see that can shift something, that we have all of that methane trapped under the tundra. And one little thing, this 1 degree more, and the tundra starts to melt, and it releases millions of tons of methane, which then starts a whole new cycle, and it becomes a runaway system. That's how things change with small little things. So we can see that in all of these things within nature, and we also see it within culture. We see that small things, like somebody can send an email and all of a sudden it gets picked up, it goes viral, and everybody can see how it's shifting. That's also, we're seeing that, talking about going viral, we'll see that in our world today with actual viruses, which is why we're being so careful, right? We have to say, like touching that one door handle, whatever it could be, our small actions could spread things in a viral way, which is now, it's no longer a metaphor. We no longer going viral is actually what's really happening. So that's the way the world works, and it's a different way of thinking. It's a way of thinking that says that we don't know, but our small actions can change so many things. Let me share screen again a little bit. So again, just this idea of the tipping point, we've really thought about things in a linear way since the time of Charles Darwin. Western culture has viewed change as a slow, gradual, accumulative phenomenon. But due to bifurcation points in a complex system, large-scale change happens dramatically fast, not gradually. Although the positive feedback leading up to bifurcation may be gradual, the change in system behavior is abrupt, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. So many things that we see that where it's gradual, little things changing, and then all of a sudden, a big shift. We see that in so many different areas. And we see that in Judaism. This is, again, the idea of a mitzvah from Pirkei Avot. Small actions have big consequences. Be careful in performing a small mitzvah as in performing a large one, since one never knows the reward of a mitzvah. That's from Pirkei Avot 2,000 years ago. This principle that says, do it even if it seems like a small thing. It might just be saying hello to a person. It might just be, going to that minyan or whatever it is. You think, oh, it's a small thing. There's so many stories in Judaism, and not only Judaism, so many folk tales about a person who did one small act of kindness and it changed the whole world. And it saved all these people. I mean, there's so many things in Judaism about that. Or the opposite, where somebody was greedy or short-sighted or angry, and it shifted everything. And so that's the way folklore sort of like takes that, because it's so true in our life that small actions can have amazing, huge consequences, but you never know. That's what makes it a spiritual act, because you never know. And again, we see this in our life, in our political, ecological actions. This is Michael Pollan writing about why bother in terms of like climate change. Climate change crisis is a very bottom, a crisis of lifestyle, of character. The big problem is nothing more or less than the sum total of countless little everyday choices, most of them made by us. So he talks about like, why bother? It's just like, oh, it's so small, but in fact, there's so many things that, in fact, we need to do in our lifestyle. And he goes on to say, it's like, it may be that you think, well, what is my small little thing that I'm going to go compost? I'm going to ride my bike. I'm going to do all of those little things. But in fact, it does make a huge difference, especially when we actually have these connections, when you can talk about it to your friends, or you can actually post it on your Instagram or your Facebook, and we can actually make our small actions visible to thousands of people. And the other thing is that we can do political actions, and that's really important as well. But the big corporations and the big politicians are not going to listen unless we're walking the walk, unless we are actually doing it ourselves and people actually see that we're walking the walk. Then those big powers, and we see that they actually start to listen when they see that this is actually really important to people. So one more thing, just Václav Havel, this is a very small quote of his, but he talks about hope is not the same. Václav Havel, who was in old Czechoslovakia under the communist regime and put in prison, and he writes, hope is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. So he talks about hope really in the same way that we might talk about faith or emunah, that he talks about it as a quality of the soul. And he was there with a few of those activists, those dissidents, in prison up against this giant communist empire, and you think this is crazy, but it's just like, no, this is the right thing to do. In Jewish language, we'd say this is the mitzvah. And so that's hope. It's a quality of the soul. And you say, it might work, it might not work, but I need to do this. And that's the feeling of a mitzvah. And things can actually change. He ended up as the president of the country. And of course, so now this is the final slide. And seeing all of these things together, this is where we started, from the land, from being on the land, from the learning that idea of relationship, the idea that our health and our security comes from maintaining our relationships and then transferring that onto the page, transferring that into learning and language, and seeing how things work in nested holes where there's permeable borders, permeable boundaries, and we don't have to choose. And again, that we are all one, that we come back, this planet is alive, it's Gaia, and our aliveness is part of the aliveness of the planet. So I want to leave a few minutes now for questions and thoughts. If people wanted to jump in, I've been doing a lot of talking, and I'd love to hear any thoughts and reactions for the last 5 minutes. As I couldn't see, was there a hand? Or you can just speak up because I can't necessarily see everyone's hand. So.
This is Zog. Shalom. Thanks, Rabbi Natan, for this teaching. I really am enjoying the way in which we see, we might say, the fractalized nature of the cosmos and what your organic Torah is pointing towards, and that gets to our personal behaviors. So very small acts, are microcosms of macrocosmic movements, and that's powerful. And I maybe you could comment on this in relationship to that. I once had an insight that the Gemara, which I think you'll really either agree with or maybe you have this insight too, that the Talmud is like a mycelial network, in a sense that it's like the Jewish tradition, the ancient Hebrew tradition, comes out of a particular land. So it's not just theoretical patterns, but it comes out of a very particular land, and that the mycelia has, like, that we drew out. It's almost like we had to codify that in the written word because we were exiled from our land. So just a comment, how do you think about, with this macro perspective, how do you think about kind of installing the software of our land-based tradition, if it is like a mycelial network, back into our relationship with the land, if we're not in the land from which our traditions came? You're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast. Like how do we make that move, given this organic Torah perspective you're offering?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you. It's a good question. Well, one of the things, part of the sort of fractal thing is that we have all of these things that we talk about as like, they're there and there is a holiness about it, but it's not meant to be an exclusive holiness. And so, we talk about Shabbat, the holiness of Shabbat, and we talk about, Kodesh v'chol, it's holiness, and then there's the rest of the week. And so, but that's never meant to be Shabbat is holy and the other days are not holy. It's meant to be an example. Shabbat is holy so that we have like a really open time when it's guarded and we can really focus on that holiness so that that holiness can spread to the rest of the world. And it's the same thing with the land of Israel that they talk about. The land of Israel is holy, but it's not to say the rest of the world is not holy. We had this experience of 1,000 years in the land of Israel, and that's the seed that we started with. And yet there's also texts, there's also the traditions that say, you know what? that's really seen as an example point. That's a place to start. That's the seed that we jump off from. But in fact, we understand that the whole world is holy. And so we don't neglect that seed. That's our starting point. But we really need to understand that the whole world is holy. And so, and in fact, there's holiness in California and holiness in New England, and they're different, and we can learn different things from them. So it remains an interesting question. It's an interesting question for me that I'm not really resolved on, because like this Sukkot, it came up like, well, do I try, why am I taking these 4 species from this land where I've got to like send them, in a box from like someplace far, should I maybe be taking pine needles and apple, or, something that's local here? Some people are doing that. And yet, so that's a little unresolved for me. How much do we actually honor where we came from and keep that honor, and how much do we actually need, because I think we really do need to learn lessons from wherever we are as well, because that's also holy. So thank you, Zelig, for that question. Yeah, these are all unresolved. They're different new ways of thinking, but again, it's very often a question of not either or, but both and. And I love that analogy of the mycelium, because it's the real thing that's going on is often underground and unseen, and we are so distracted by what's on the surface. But when you look at this sort of underground nourishment that we're still getting, that's a big part of where we can get our nourishment from. Okay, thank you all so much. It's great to be learning with you. I know that there was, I think, maybe a closing, if there are no other more questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Rabbi Natan. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. My name is Malka. I'm with Wilderness Torah, and just want to give a quick closing before we wrap up for any other last questions that folks might have. Again, all of our sessions are being recorded. They're live streamed on Facebook if you would like to go back and watch. And they'll be on our website as well about a week after. All of our sessions are streamed here on Zoom. Next week, we have really sweet offerings to share, chances to really move your body and express your voice. We'll have Qigong with Leah Borowski, and a session called Songs to Sustain Us with Kohenet Riv Shapiro, as well as Wander and Wonder with Day Schildkret of Morning Altars and Making Earth Art. And we'll also be taught by Zelig around the importance of the sacred fire as we prepare for Lag BaOmer. Stay tuned for our newsletter. It comes out every week, stating more details about all of this programming, and you can always check out our social media on Facebook or Instagram. And my peer Alana will put in our website link again for those who missed it, as well as our donation page if you feel called to support more. And lastly, just thank you so much, Rabbi Natan. Such important wisdom, and so aligned with the work of Wilderness Torah as we really look to the patterns of nature and the outdoor world and the wilderness and all of these things to really inform us, especially during these times and always. So thank you for this incredible teaching, and we're so grateful you joined us. And I'll pass it back to you for any closing words, and we'll say our goodbyes.
Okay. Thank you, Malka. It's so good to be with you, the people that I know and the people that I'm just meeting for the first time. I'd love to talk more with you. If you ever want to contact me, you can find me at organictorah.org. And I'm also Organic Torah. We just joined Aleph. So if you go to the Aleph.org page, you can find me there as well. But I'd love to continue the conversation as we're doing a lot of really cool things. This is really the 3 MEMS is kind of the basic things that we start out with in Organic Torah, but we're really looking to say, how can we connect what we learn in our Judaism? How do we totally just connect that to nature so it's a seamless connection? Thanks so much. Shabbat Shalom. Great to see you all.
Thanks, Reb Natan. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.